So are these products relevant to Uganda? Of course they're relevant to Uganda. And the more quickly we put newer vehicles in the hands of Ugandans that are easier to maintain and better on the environment, the more people will benefit from having them. So the second part of the question is about what success do you see from having the vehicles around, or what success do you see in the vehicles? And so it's clear that they're relevant to the country, and that if we buy, or if we build, and if Uganda decides to build quality cars, as Paul has suggested, so that they're the choice of people, then they will be successful both here and outside the community. But let's take a moment and enlarge the idea of success. As a person who traveled between universities as part of my jobs in the US, I had a lot of time in the car. And I found a company that made professors' lectures available in audio format. And one of the ones that I've been listening to most recently is about how economies grow. And if you boil down the 24 lecture series and the 12 hours into a very short statement, it looks at all of the economies that have grown either 1 to 2% over 100 years or more than 3 to 5% over 20 years. And there are lots of countries that fall into that category, and there's two things that happen. One, stability is created. Do these cars help build successful, stable countries? You bet. I'm from a place in the world where you realize that the automotive industry is a very large boat economically. And so it can help create the jobs that create stability within a country and an area. The second part, the second thing that has to happen is you increase the productivity of the populace. It's those two things, right? Irregardless of whether it's in China or Singapore or Japan or here. And how does this improve productivity? Think about that for a second. It's not just the fact that you build cars and add value. That's the easy one. But also there's brain retention, which you've talked about, and the professors have talked about. On this team right now, I think 3 or 4, and this is just the ones that I know of, 3 or 4 of the young engineers have gone somewhere else and are now back because there's a job here to sustain them. From Malaysia, from MIT, they come back to Uganda because there's a place for them to work. That's exciting. Identity and aspiration. This is an important one in increasing productivity. If you don't believe that you can do something and you haven't seen it, that is a negative impact on your ability to be productive. One of the benefits I'll tell you a small story. In 2008, I was with the John F. Kennedy School class watching election results in 2008, and President Obama was elected. And the French came over and they said, we couldn't do that here. We couldn't do that in France. And the Swedish students that were there said, we couldn't do that in Sweden. And there are lots of students that see Obama, and all of a sudden they believe they can go do something, and it helps their productivity. So if we believe that we can make cars here, that can increase the productivity of people because of the identity and the aspiration and proving that this is possible. The knock-on success that can come from building, the additional success that can come from building cars. I'll give you an example because Ford Motor Company was started near where I am. And I didn't know most of this until I started to look at the history of the auto industry. But 2 of the largest car companies in 1913 in Michigan were Buick and Ford. Both Buick and Ford, 20 years earlier, had been working in the same plumbing manufacturing company. Isn't that strange? They were plumbers. They were learning to be plumbers, and 20 years later, they're 2 people involved in the largest car companies in the country. So you don't know where the skilling will end up taking the country, but it can be exciting and non-linear. Right? Why were plumbers good? Because, of course, an internal combustion engine has a lot of pipes in it. And so when you became good at one, you became good at the other. That brings me to finance and the successful things that can happen with when we open up financing for these for this company in particular, to people in Uganda. I went to school at University of Michigan, and the hall that I was in was called Cousins Hall, and I never thought much about it. And I'm learning about the history of the auto industry 20 years later, and I see a guy's name as one of the first investors in Ford Motor Company. The smallest investor in Ford Motor Company in 1904 was Mr. Cousins. I went to a building that has his name on it because that money was able to come back into the community. All of that investment, the 21% return that you get on this, can be reinvested into people as soon as we open up this operation to be invested in by individuals. And then I find the most interesting success that I saw with the iLabs Africa project was unexpected. And this goes to your point that you just made a moment ago. We don't want you to just make cars, right? I shouldn't say we, but you don't want to just make cars. You want to be partners in creating technology in the world. And the MIT iLabs Africa project, MIT intended to give access to expensive equipment that was at MIT through the internet, and all of the information would flow outward from MIT to Uganda. And you remember this, right? You remember Judd telling us this. All of a sudden, 2 years later, the MIT people were learning from the Ugandan group how to work in different situations that they'd never thought of before. So Ugandans were becoming partners in the making of the technology. And that's an exciting success as well. So all of those things could be thought of as success. The cars, I think, will be fine if they're made to the right quality, which I believe the team will be able to do. Now, let me say two other things. There's a cautionary tale in all of this. I work with technologists because my company makes technology that helps scientists and engineers of all kinds to get their ideas out into the world. And I had a customer who, and I will keep the details sort of vague because I don't want to break any agreements that we have with them. But this customer had created a way to do training of first responders to an event, like nurses and doctors and ambulances, right? And by making an automated, they made a prototype of an automated